The widow's oil multiplication, a lesson in faith and divine providence. Have you ever wondered how a simple act of faith can completely transform a life? Today, we bring you the inspiring story of the widow who witnessed the multiplication of oil in one of the most beautiful miracles recorded in the Scriptures. Get ready to dive into a narrative full of hope, overcoming, and the certainty that God works even in the most difficult moments. If you enjoy stories that inspire and touch the heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to keep up with more content that strengthens faith and the soul. Let's go together on this journey of discoveries and reflections. In a small village in Israel, there lived a widow in despair. Her husband, a God-fearing man, had passed away, leaving her with an unsustainable debt. Without resources and with 2 children to care for, she found herself powerless in the face of the threat of losing what she loved most, her children, who would be taken as slaves to pay the debt. The creditors were relentless, and the widow was at the end of her strength, but she did not give up. In her anguish, she sought the prophet Elisha, the man of God, to cry out for help. Her request was not just for a financial solution, but for a miracle, for hope, dignity, and redemption for her family. It was a moment of extreme vulnerability. The widow had no one to trust but God. She no longer had material resources, only her faith. And it is precisely at this point of total dependence on God that she would experience the miracle. She went to Elisha knowing that only a divine intervention could change her situation. She was not just seeking a temporary solution, but the restoration of her life, the reconciliation with her dignity, and the salvation of her children. When Elisha heard her plea, he asked a simple yet profound question: "What do you have in the house?" This question, which may seem ordinary at first glance, carries undeniable spiritual depth. The widow, with a heavy heart and eyes full of tears, replied that she had nothing except a small jar of oil. This response, as simple as it may seem, is symbolic. Often, in the face of life's challenges, we see only what we lack, forgetting what we already have in our hands. The oil, though scarce, represented the hidden potential in her house and in her life. God, in His infinite wisdom, is an expert in turning little into much, as long as we place what we have in His hands. Every small resource in our lives can be used by God as a starting point for miracles. When we put our trust in Him and give what we have, even if it seems insufficient, He makes it multiply to meet our needs. With divine wisdom, Elisha gave an unusual instruction. She should ask her neighbors for empty vessels, as many as she could find. Do not ask for a few, he warned, emphasizing the need to expand her faith and believe in the magnitude of what God would do. This guidance was not just a practical strategy, but a test of faith. Each vessel represented an opportunity to trust in divine provision, even without understanding how it would happen. Imagine the courage needed to go from house to house, knock on doors, and explain the desperate situation. She would face curious looks, skeptical questions, perhaps even sarcasm from those who did not believe that something so extraordinary was possible. But despite that, she pressed on with faith, even without knowing how everything would unfold. This moment of obedience teaches us that, in our moments of need, we must be willing to open our hearts and accept help, trusting that divine providence can come in unexpected ways and through our community. The act of asking for borrowed vessels also teaches us about humility and vulnerability. Often, the shame of needing others prevents us from receiving the help that God has prepared for us. The widow was not ashamed of her situation. She simply placed herself in God's hands and did what was asked of her. She knew that, to experience the miracle, she needed to act. This is an important principle. Faith is not passive. It calls us to act, to move, and to make decisions, even when the final result seems uncertain. With her children, the widow walked the streets, collecting vessels from all around, filling her house with empty containers. They knocked on doors, explained the situation, and asked for help, a task that required great humility and courage. This was not only a physical task, but also a spiritual exercise. Each empty vessel that entered her home was a symbol of the widow's faith, a reminder that she was waiting for something extraordinary. Imagine the scene: a house full of empty vessels, all waiting to be filled. Each vessel represented space for God to act. When everything was ready, the widow closed the door as Elisha had instructed. The closing of the door has a profound meaning. The miracle would not be performed before a crowd, but in secret, away from curious eyes. This shows that many times God works in silence, in private places and moments that do not attract attention but are full of His transforming power. In silence, God prepares us, molds us, and often tests us. He wants us to trust in Him not because of what others see, but because of our personal trust and devotion. Inside the house, with her children by her side, she began to pour the oil. To her surprise, the small jar never ran out. The oil flowed relentlessly, filling vessel after vessel, one after the other. Each empty container became a testimony of divine abundance. With each full vessel, her hope was renewed, and her children saw with their own eyes the power of God in action. Every drop of oil that fell was a promise fulfilled, a tangible sign that God was faithful and capable of providing. The work of filling the vessels was not just a physical task, but also a spiritual experience for the widow and her children. They learned that God's power is not limited by human circumstances. He can do more than we imagine when we trust in Him. When the last vessel was filled, the oil stopped. This interruption was not a sign of God's limitation, but rather the number of vessels. Had there been more containers, more oil would have been poured. This reminds us that divine abundance is limitless, but our capacity to receive depends on our willingness to make room for Him in our lives. God's provision is always available to those who are ready to receive it, but often it is we who need to expand our faith and our limits to welcome His blessings. The miracle concluded when Elisha instructed the widow to sell the oil, pay her debt, and live on the rest. God not only met the widow's immediate need, but also prepared the way for her future. The oil, which once seemed insignificant, became the means by which her life was completely transformed. This story is a powerful lesson that God not only solves our problems, but also empowers us to prosper in the long term. As we reflect on this narrative, we can draw parallels with our own lives. How many times do we look at what we have and consider it insufficient for our needs? Yet, God calls us to act in faith, to offer Him the little we have and trust that He will do the rest. Every empty vessel in our lives is an opportunity for God to act supernaturally. The more we make room in our lives for God, the greater the flow of His blessings will be. The story of the widow teaches us to trust in His timing and His purpose, even when we don't understand how He will act. The widow also teaches us about the importance of obedience. She followed Elisha's instructions precisely, without questioning or trying to understand the details of the plan. She trusted, and obedience became the key to the miracle. Often, we are called to take steps of faith without knowing the final result, but God teaches us that, at the right moment, He reveals His will and His provision. Just as a seed is planted without knowing how it will grow, our faith is the soil in which God makes His work blossom. Finally, the widow's story challenges us to trust in God, even when circumstances seem impossible. The miracle of the oil multiplication is a reminder that, even in the most difficult situations, God is capable of turning the little we have into unexpected abundance. He can meet our needs and still bless us in ways we never imagined. Therefore, let us learn from the widow's story to trust fully in God, offer Him the little we have, and make room for His blessings to manifest in our lives. After all, God remains the same. A loving Father who cares for His children, meeting their needs and bringing hope in times of despair. Just as the widow's oil never ran out, so too will divine providence never run out in our lives when we walk in faith and obedience. May this story be a constant reminder that God always has something extraordinary prepared for us when we trust in Him and open our hearts to receive His abundance. This story of the widow's oil multiplication is a powerful reminder that, even in the most difficult moments, God has the power to turn the little we have into abundance. He will always be present to meet our needs when we trust fully in His providence and act with faith and obedience. May we learn to trust in God, offering the simplest we have and, in doing so, making room for Him to perform miracles in our lives. As we saw in this story, faith, obedience, and a willingness to act are the keys to living under God's abundant grace. If this message touched your heart, don't forget to share it with friends and family who also need this inspiration. Leave your comment below, share your opinion, and share this video to spread more hope and faith. And of course, if you haven't already liked this video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to receive all our updates. Let's continue learning and growing in faith together. Until next time.